refugee claim, they become claimants, protected person if they're accepted, and then on until permanent resident and Canadian citizen. Next slide, please. So the total number of refugee claims Canada has received in 2024 is 119,000. That's so far this year. Again, equivalent to 0.3% of the population of Canada. So who becomes a refugee claimant? Who arrives here and asks for protection? Individuals who've had to leave their home country due to war, persecution, etc., and they're seeking protection. And unlike resettled refugees, the first groups that I was telling you about, these claimants arrive in Canada independently. So imagine arriving in a new country because you are seeking safety, you know nobody, you have no knowledge of the local system, you don't know how anything works, you might even have language barriers. It is men and women of all ages, professional backgrounds, and family status. It's a very diverse group. Why are claimants in Ottawa? They come from all over the world for many different reasons. As I said, persecution, etc. They're seeking safety. A lot of them are attracted to the idea of being in the capital city. And bilingualism is also a big attraction as well. So how does someone make a refugee claim? You must submit an application for asylum. It's a complicated legal document with a lot of room for mistakes, and any mistake sets you back in your process. So it's complicated and you need help to fill it out. It's your personal history, your reasons for seeking protection, etc. That case is then heard after many, many months by the Immigration and Refugee Board, which is known around the world as one of the most robust bodies for determining refugee claims. IRB currently has a backlog of cases, and it can take more than a year to get a hearing. Most claimants now are eligible to work while they wait for their hearing, and there's usually a gap of a few months before they get a work permit, but most of them can't wait to get that work permit and start contributing and not to be reliant on anybody. If they're deemed ineligible, they may appeal a deportation order in courts. So I will just say about, people have asked us in the past, are they screened? No. Before they arrive, we can't screen them because we don't know they're coming. It's just like with tourists or anybody who doesn't require a visa to come to our country. We do not screen the background of everyone who comes to Canada. So they are screened once they are here. But the number one thing I want to leave you with is the understanding that, and I think this is coming up in a slide, but I'm going to say it now anyway. Refugee status, being a refugee is not a comment on your character, your professional background, your legal history. It is a comment on your immigration status only. That's all. So why do we need a reception center just for newcomers? So the main reason is they have different needs than most of the other unhoused population. They need legal advice, as I talked about, for their immigration status work. They need language interpretation services sometimes, employment advice to help them with the local job market. And they need support finding housing in a market that they don't know, or while they wait for a work permit so that they can save enough to afford rent. And they need support navigating new systems like health and education. And later you're going to have a chance to talk to the amazing folks in that back corner of the room who work with refugee claimants every day, and they can tell you about the services they need and about who refugee claimants are. So currently the acceptance rate for refugee claimants is around 70 to 75%. What that means is that most of the people who will stay in the Newcomer Reception Center will end up living here in Canada, probably Ottawa. They're here to put down roots. Many of them are already working, volunteering. There are people in the current overflow shelters who are sleeping on bunk beds or cots in an arena or a community center, who are getting up every day and going to a job, or they're volunteering, or they're taking a course. They're doing what they can to stay busy while they wait for their status to be determined. They just can't afford a house here. So what can you do to help? The number one thing is spread good information. Don't let anybody tell you that a refugee is a security risk. Don't let anybody tell you that the reception centers aren't needed. Make sure that they understand the nature of the refugee claims process, who refugees are, and why they are deserving of our help. They are in our community now. As a community, across the community, this is a problem that we have to solve, and the problem is not refugees. The problem is people living in undignified circumstances in the arenas and the community centers who need a better start. The city has a reasonable plan. Nobody cares more about the conditions in which refugee claimants are living than service providers and the people who work with them every day. And we endorse this plan because we understand that it is far superior to the status quo. Thanks. One more slide, I think. Yeah, I just wanted folks, I handed out FAQs to the folks in the front, but you can scan the code there or at the back to get the updated FAQs. We're also going to be producing them in other languages, so keep checking that file. We'll have it in simplified Chinese, Arabic, and Ukrainian soon. That's it. If you want to ask me any questions, I'm at info@refugee613.ca. Please focus on getting good information and not repeating the bad. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, Louisa and everyone from Refugee 613 will be available at the meeting as well. All right, so that was the presentation from Refugee 613. Next up is a presentation from City of Ottawa staff. This is Geraldine Wildman and Cale Brown. And also, I beg your pardon, we also have presenting at the same time, Peter Morose from Stantec.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to go through a little bit to explain the background on what we're talking about here. So the structure we're talking about here is not the whole of the plan. What we're really trying to create here is a newcomer reception model. And really this is focused on transitioning people quickly out of these community centers through a process, get settlement, and integrate into our community. And as you just saw from Louisa, many of these refugee claimants that are coming in out are integrating into our community. And they are accepted. And we have tremendous success. And I think to give you a sense as I go through this, the people living here are working, they're already integrating in our community, and this gives them a more dignified approach to do that. So the first step we're having in our proposed model for this refugee claimant system is you arrive at these reception centers. Now these reception centers, the whole point of them is that you're staying there for up to 90 days to get the supports and services you need in the settlement process. So this is doing an immense amount of paperwork, as Louisa so eloquently put, going through the legal process, filling out the documents, it's paperwork, it's medical appointments. There's a number of things you need to do to move through that process, and that's why we want people staying on site. All the services, supports will be brought to that site just to be purely efficient of getting them out of that environment and into transitional housing or into long-term housing. So that's step one. And really, we want people on site. Food will be provided on site, and I'll get a little bit more into the model. But again, it's about having those wraparound supports on site so that people can quickly move through the process. Step two, there's two options for this. So if people aren't able to find long-term housing or settle in the community within that 90 days, and we know the housing market's tight, we want to have a backup. So what we would move people to after that 90 days, and they're through that intensive settlement process part of it, you would move into transitional housing. So in our proposal, there's two pieces of transitional housing. There's scattered sites, so we're looking at doing homes around the city. And this is a very successful model we see with Matthew House, Carty House, Stepstone House, if you've heard of these organizations. Essentially, they have family homes all across the city already. There's over 350 beds. We already fund the city for this. They're probably in your neighborhood and you don't know. This is a really successful model. And that's where people are going to go after if they need a little bit more time to find housing. And typically people settle in the community where they're in that transitional housing. Another important thing is we've recently purchased St. Joseph, which is the nuns convent or former nuns convent out in Orleans, and that will also act as louder. Oh, okay, that's better. We've purchased another former convent out in Orleans, and that will also act as transitional housing. And we've also converted the YMCA over from a family shelter to support some of these single newcomers coming from these physical distancing centers that are in community centers. So I just want to reiterate too, as staff, we had looked at all options. Like I mentioned, converting the YMCA, we want permanent structures. We want to be able to do this, but the need is great, and we've been in community centers now for 4.5 years. So we need to move on something, and that's what we want to create, is this model that will create quick flow through the system and have people integrate and be part of our communities. Next slide, please. So what are these structures? So I think it's important to know, I hear this a lot of people not understanding exactly what these are. These buildings go up with full HVAC systems, sprinklers, washrooms. This will have a commercial kitchen. We'll be providing food on site. Like I said, the whole intent of this is to have everything provided on site so we can do that intensive case management and settlement work. That's what we want to do, is move people quick. And to do that process in 90 days, you need people on site. You need those supports on site. So it's all about having those wraparound supports on site. In terms of how we got to settling on this, as I mentioned, we had searched for the last 4 years to find permanent options. Like I said, we've got some of them like St. Joseph, but again, it's been 4 years. People need their community centers back, and this was the quickest option that we were able to set up. So when we had an external consultant come in, do an evaluation of rapid construction options, and the option that fit our timelines, cost, and what we were going to be able to do to give people more dignified living space, this was the best one that came back from that consultant report. It's also important to note with these, a number of the sites we were evaluated are not for permanent builds. So the fact that this is a temporary build, it will not be 150 years. The sites and the zoning that we had, it needed to be a temporary site, and that's part of why we went with these. So the other thing I want to mention too with this is when we got to this, a number of the things we've heard is why didn't we look at office space? We looked at office space, we looked at school board space, we looked at a whole bunch of different permanent spaces, as I mentioned, lease, purchase, everything under the sun. And again, after 4 years, we've arrived at we need to do something, and this was the fastest option as per the consultant report that we wanted to go with. The structures are also great in that after, if you build a shelter, when you're done with it being a shelter, and we want to solve this problem, it can't really be used for much other than a shelter type purpose. So these as well can be reconfigured on the inside and have some use to the community after we're done using them for this immigration. So if you go to the next slide, it shows a little bit of what these structures will look like. So you may have seen in the news, what we've seen from Toronto, theirs looks very different than ours, but these are used, there's one at the Ottawa Hospital. So these are used all throughout North America, Canada, the US, for this purpose, and there's lots of different configurations of what these can look like. We want these to be a part of the community, and again, these are buildings. These, when they go up, they have all the normal building systems, showers, everything on site. I don't know if, angle. So if we go to the next slide, this is a little bit of what the interior looks like. What we are not doing is just creating an arena inside these. These are going to be transitional housing, so each person will have their own pod or unit that they can go into. And again, this is immensely better than sleeping on an open arena floor. That is not what we're building here. This is going to have dignified, where you have your own privacy space as you go through this process. So again, these are very configurable on the inside, and as I mentioned, have some use after, because you can take out the things in the middle once we've solved the crisis. Next slide, please. So this whole process started, and to give you a sense of the timeline, this has taken about 10 months to get to the point on the sprung structures of where we are today in terms of site selection. I know there's a lot of questions around that. So in February, 2024, we had identified through our corporate real estate team at the city, over 90 city sites. Our team at Housing Services, we reviewed those and landed on a top 3 sites of what would work from a feasibility perspective in terms of operations, and also the amenities. So there was a number of evaluation criteria we looked at, including amenity around, accessibility to transit. So during the discussions, we landed on those top 3 sites. We brought those to council. When those were brought to council, council had directed us to go back and look at additional options, i.e. federal land. So when we went back following that council meeting in July, looked at federal land, and one of the sites that was brought forward in working with the federal government was the 1645 Woodruff one. And again, that was the land that was discussed that works from an operations perspective. It does have access to transit. There's forest. Some of the other sites we looked at, there was a lot of forest cover, environmental restrictions that would have made, again, a multi-year process to be able to look at these sites. So we really found one working with the federal government that didn't have any of those restrictions. Again, going back to that urgency of getting something in place, this was the one that worked best. We'd also reached out, as I mentioned before, to the Ottawa the school boards to see if they had sites. And again, through that review, there was nothing that could be implemented or stood up in the timelines that we're looking to do. There was also 3 OC Transpo Park and Ride sites that were identified for use. As you know, that's one of the other sites we're looking at. And then in September 2024, once we had gone through this process of looking at additional federal land, we went back and we needed to know which one of these lands could we actually build on. So we provided those sites to Stantec to do an engineering review, and Stantec will be going through exactly what that process looked like. And again, I want to reiterate, we and the social services side of things are not the engineering professionals. So part of the process and due diligence we had to do, we needed to bring in consultants to do the engineering, construction, planning side of things. So you're going to hear a little bit more about that in a moment. And I think with that, that is my slides. Logan?
Yes, ma'am. How about this one? Better? Okay. Next slide, please. So we did hire Stantec here tonight. They had confirmed that 3 of those 5 sites that the city felt was suitable were feasible from an engineering perspective. It could meet those timelines that Kale spoke about. So Stantec is here tonight, and they can give a quick overview of some of those key technical considerations for the Nepean Sportsplex. So evaluation criteria used by Stantec on the slide to give people an idea of what that evaluation consisted of. And really the assessment was needed to confirm the serviceability of the sites, project timelines, and cost. So Stantec also provided a concept plan for each of the 3 feasible sites. Those were 1645 Woodruff Avenue, which is here at the Nepean Sportsplex, 40 Hearst Way, and 3311 Woodruff Avenue. So Stantec will be sharing a possible concept with the group tonight for your information. And we do have a report that is going to be released, I understand, tomorrow. If people would like more information on that engineering exercise and some of those considerations. Next slide, please. So just wanted to share a bit of the policy context that staff really have to adhere to when making decisions about land use. And so these are council-approved policies. They're included in our official plan, and that is a provincially mandated document that sets out how the city will grow. And so to put it really simply, the city's goal is to provide housing to everybody. And so ensuring that people have a place to live, no matter where they come from, it really makes our city an inclusive and attractive place to live. And so having a strong housing system that offers choice, it also helps attract investment to our area. And as somebody who's worked in development with a lot of high-tech companies over the years, we hear this quite often. Quality of life, and this is one of the ways that we achieve that quality here in Ottawa. So, Ottawa's policies do allow these kinds of facilities in all urban designations now, citywide. The policies also prevent staff from placing restrictions on housing, whether it's permanent or temporary. And so the policies do really work together, and they continue to evolve with the goal of ensuring that we do supply a mix of housing. And in the planning world, we just call this housing choice. And that's really what makes neighborhoods thrive. Next slide, please. So when speaking about that land, some of the I guess what we hear quite frequently coming back about site selection, why one site versus another. So Cale did speak about this. Staff did assess many sites, and some of those were ruled out for reasons that Cale mentioned, whether it was contamination, whether there were future transit priorities for those lands, known redevelopment plans and so forth. So the city, what I want to reiterate to everyone here is that we do really have a good understanding of our land assets, and staff know things about that land that's not necessarily known by the public because it's not maybe visually apparent. So what did we consider when evaluating potential sites for a newcomer reception center? We looked at a preference for publicly owned lands. So of course this provides us with control of the lands. It keeps those uses public, like we've spoken about. It ensures that we can adapt those uses in the future, and it gives us a lot of certainty when we own lands, when we're operating programs on them. Those social services criteria that Cale mentioned, we needed large sites to be able to accommodate the proposed structure and the ideal design. And then that engineering feasibility that was discussed and planning considerations as well. And I'll go into those a little bit more in depth for the site. But first I want to just share an aerial. So next slide, please, of the site. I know we all know where we are, but I don't know how many of you look at this site from an aerial perspective very often. And so really the star is where the approximate location of the new structure will be. So it's next to the football field. And Stantec will share a possible concept plan with us shortly. So again, moving to the next slide now, after we've seen the site, how does this site match up with those considerations that I spoke about? Well, it is a federal site. It's already used by the city. The structure can be repurposed in the future. A recreational use would fit well here. I think we can all agree to that. This is a commitment that's been made by the city that we do want to repurpose these when they're no longer used. The site meets that social services criteria, and I think one of the selling points of this property is that those services can be offered within existing buildings on the site. And we already offer programming and events here that would be complementary to this use. The site's large, of course. It can accommodate good design, both from the perspective of the community and the users. And we also like that the impacts to the community, both in terms of construction and the visual impact, for example, would be minimized. So this site is self-contained. Feasible in terms of engineering, services are available, and then those planning considerations. So the zoning of this site already permits the use, and there's ample green space and amenity area as well. The site is screened and it's separated from the surrounding community. The proposed use does not impact the enjoyment or the use of the Nepean Sportsplex, the school, and again, more recently, thanks to your counselor and working with city staff to understand the importance and the value of the football field in the community. So there will be a subsequent site planning process where residents can provide feedback on the design. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Peter from Stantec, who can talk briefly about the engineering.
Thank you, Geraldine. My name is Peter Morose. I'm a Stantec Consulting. I'm a principal and engineer on this project. Little personal story. I am a former asylum seeker. I immigrated to Canada in 1986. We left Poland in 1985 to Germany, and then from there as asylum seeker, legal immigrants, we immigrated to Canada. So this project is quite close to me, and I ironically also live beside that sprung structure, beside the civic hospital. So I am, fully aware of what the structure looks like. Anyway, thanks to Geraldine, she involved us in the project to look at the sites, 5 sites, as she said, 3 of which we evaluated for as suitable for this type of structure. We looked at it from geotechnical, planning, environmental, and a civil infrastructure perspective, as well as a zoning. Again, we provided with 5 sites, out of which we had the selection, so that was the limit of our review. Next slide. This is the layout of the site for 1645 Woodruff. What's important to understand is that sites like this, the buildings like this is about 30,000 square foot building requires a lot of space, and it's nice to have it well graded, lots of room to maneuver with the building, as well as access to servicing is important. So this is, we prepared a preliminary concept plan to kind of ensure that the site fits on the site, that it can be serviced properly by vehicles, transportation trucks, as well as by the services. So because it's within an existing complex, there's lots of services to connect to. So it's well serviced by the stormwater, water, and sanitary sewer. The grading of the site is relatively also advantageous because it's on an existing soccer field, so that we don't need too much grading or earth movements to actually accommodate the building. We have, again, we looked at stormwater, and we felt that the site can be serviced with existing storm sewer system. Their emergency overflow for this site would be directed to existing digital half-life, so there's no concerns as far as flooding or additional water coming out of the building. Next slide. Again, we looked at the space, and we felt that the space is adequate for building and planting with a lot of places to maneuver. Complies with existing zoning. It is designated for this use. Based on the environmental records, we felt the site does not require site condition, record of site condition, and also the soil source for proposed building. Some of the things for consideration was to follow the federal land use design and transaction approval process, which is because the site is situated on federal lands, it does need to go through that federal process for approvals. This is applicable to all the sites. And there are a little higher site preparation costs between sufficient information to establish geotechnical, which we'll then get into once we do a little bit more soils investigation on the site. I think that's it on my slides.
This one seems to work. So I think one of the important things to know is what is the next steps? Where are we going from here in terms of after the Stantec report and identifying the sites? First, we need the IRCC funding commitment. I think one of the biggest concerns that we've heard from the community is, are your city tax dollars going towards this? The answer is no, it is not. This is going fully funded through federal government in our proposal. All operational costs, all capital costs. We also need to go ahead and complete the procurement process. So with that procurement process, we need to first establish that, go through the city's regular process for procurement, go to tender, that kind of thing. So there's a number of processes we need to go through in terms of getting the structures. We're also going to do a detailed site and facility design process. So this is where we get into the nuts and bolts. As you saw, the work Stantec did the initial site design concept plans, but we of course have to do the design engineering components of this. So that's again, working with engineers to develop these concepts in a lot more detail. Our aim, because these can build very quickly, is to have these operational like Q4 2025 ahead of next winter. So we're kind of pushing as fast as we can to try and still meet those timelines so that, again, we can give those community centers back and give people more dignified living space.
All right, hello ladies and gentlemen again. So, here's what's gonna happen. We're gonna take a brief 5-minute pause while our various subject matter experts can go to the other side of the room, and please make space when we get to the other side of the room. So they're gonna set up at the information booth. So we're gonna have Stantec over in the corner, we're gonna have the City of Ottawa in the back, and we're gonna have Refugee 613 in the corner, and my office is gonna have a table right there. So when I recommend, so one thing that I know is that there is I'll tell you what I do know, that there is not a single consensus of opinion here. There is a plurality of positions, even in this room. One thing that I'll tell you that I'm concerned about is the kind of polarization that happens when residents, right now we've got about 150 people in a room together, at least. I strongly encourage you over the next 5 minutes, 10, 15, 25, 30, talk to each other. There are different opinions in this room. So, grab a coffee. You're going to be able to talk to us. I'm going to be over there. City of Ottawa is going to be over there. Stantec's going to be over there. We're going to take 5 minutes, grab a coffee, and then I'm sure we're going to have quite a lively conversation. So thank you for being here, and we're going to see you over there in about 5 minutes.